Welcome, podcast, Surfcast Podcast. Welcome back. Today we are going to be tackling metal lips again. A favorite plug, a most hated plug, misunderstood plug.
Yes.
Plugs that people are afraid of. And one of the things that people are afraid of with metal lips is messing with them, is doing anything to them to make them do what they want. And I think Toby and I are both inclined to make a plug do what we want. We are big into solving the problem in a surf with the plug, not using a plug just because we heard it's good or it's supposed to be good or caught fish. They're problem-solving devices. And so if we want them to do something, we're going to make them do it, or we're going to throw them in the garbage. So with that being said, there are some things you can do to tune a metal lip. And with that very vague introduction, I'm going to now kick it over to Toby. And Toby, let you start with the couple of ways that we were going to talk about how you could tune a metal lip. I'm going to let you decide which one you want to start with. So you go ahead.
Yeah, so we talked about, we're going to discuss the metal lip itself, the actual piece of the metal lip plug, the metal lip, and the line tie. Two subjects we're going to talk about.
That's right.
And one, I mess around with a whole bunch on the fly, always working with it. The other, I'm kind of a get it where I want it and forget it and move on kind of guy. So I'm going to start off with set it and forget it, which for me is the metal lip itself.
Okay.
Like you said, we take these surf plugs as tools for solving problems, for making them do what we want. And so with the metal lips, while I will take into account what the person who produced it, the manufacturer, the guy who came up with that plug itself wanted it to do, I still tweak it a bit and make it do exactly what I want, what I need, where I want it to go. So when I get a new metal lip, I always test swim them. I see what it does, basically what the manufacturer presented to me. If that suits my taste somewhere or my needs somewhere, I'm good. I walk away. But if I want it to maybe roll a little bit more or bite a little bit more along those lines, then I'll tweak that metal lip just a hair and tune it, so to speak, to get the right swim, the right bite. But for the most part, brand new, I'm not doing a whole lot with the metal lip itself. But while I'm out there fishing, I leave it the way I want it to be. But I'm always checking it, meaning if I'm running a deep diver and I know I'm hitting bottom, or I feel I hit bottom once, I check it after every cast. I give it a drag in front of me, make sure it's still doing what I know that thing is supposed to be doing if it hadn't been altered. And then I start playing with it. So again, once I'm out in the water, in the surf, I'm kind of leaving her alone. I spend my time tweaking that metal lip on non-fishing time when I'm testing out the plug, getting a feel for it, getting an idea for exactly what it does.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you're really choosing, with your metal lip, you're choosing the style of plug to go in a certain place in the water column or have some kind of action. And then that's how you're accepting what you're using. You're not then taking a slightly subsurface lure and making it surface or making it drive down deeper. You're going to reach for a different plug. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
that's what you're basically
exactly saying. For the only time I'll go to that extreme, I'll call it, of attempting to make a surface dive or a diver surface is if I don't have that tool in my surf bag and I suddenly feel I need it. If I only have deep divers and I'm seeing them blow up on the surface and they're not taking my deep diver, then I might play around with it. But I would hope that I would have already had something else in my bag that I could throw in that scenario. And I wouldn't have to then play with the metal lip.
Right.
I'd switch to darter that I could just crawl, stay near the surface, a slow sinking needlefish, something. I'd probably try to go elsewhere. It would sort of be like a last resort to on the fly tweak the metal lip to get it to do something I wanted.
That's right. Exceedingly rare for you to not have something in your bag that could potentially do something a little bit better rather than messing with the lip and making it do something. I actually, thinking about this beforehand, I hadn't really considered something that you said, which is that on the water. I don't usually mess with the lip too much on the water either. If I have jammed too many plugs in my bag and I screw up the lip, that's about the only time I'll really mess a lot with it on the water. which isn't 0%. Let me put it that way. It definitely happens. That's definitely in my wheelhouse of putting too many plugs in and screwing things up.
It should be when, not if.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. That's right. That being said, I am stubborn, I think, in a lot of ways when it comes to metal lips. When I choose a class of metal lip, I want it to do the same thing. So if a manufacturer makes a Danny or an Adam 40 style or, a junior style, whatever, I want that plug to do a certain amount of swim, roll, dig, nose down, nose up, tail wag, blah, 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 any of that stuff. And if I get something and the manufacturer, the guy making it, wanted it to do this, and I get it and I go, no, I don't like that. No, screw that. That's wrong. They're wrong. I'm right.
They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing. I'm going to take that lip, and I'm going to mess with it. And, I read on the internet all the time, and you hear people say, never touch the lip. If you touch the lip, you ruin the plug forever. You'll never be the same. It'll be ruined. You waste your 40, 50, 60 bucks. It's gone. It'll be the end of the world. Your plug will be junk. That's garbage. That's so silly. That's the dumbest thing. I hate reading that online. I mean, come on. It's a piece of metal. If you can get it back to roughly the same shape, you're good. Now, if you grind off a bit of the nose of a darter, I've seen that destroy it really quick. But I've yet to have a metal lip where I've messed with the lip and got it so deformed that the plug was junk. Now, you might have to go back to the garage, go back to your basement, whatever. If you really screwed up, use some vice grips, flatten it back out, take any of the curve out, get the angles back. You might have to do a little bit of work off the shore. So maybe, again, this comes back to what we were talking about, not messing with it when you're out fishing. But in terms of if you mess with it, you might screw it up forever and then throw it away. That's garbage. I don't care what kind of lip it is. I don't care if it's a Surfster or I don't care what it is. So when I get it and I swim it and I go, not too much wag. Nope, dives too deep. Nope, doesn't push through the surface film. Nope, it's not going deep enough. Nope, it's going way too deep. If I see any of that stuff, I'm going to make it do exactly what I want. And for that reason, I am unafraid of mangling that lip if I need to. Because again, I don't care what it looks like. I just want it to work. So in the end, if it works, if it solves the problem, if it's the right size peg for the right size hole, then, who cares? So that's really how I first feel about the lip. And I've done a lot of modifying of some very good builders just to make it do what I want,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the thing. So that's the really extreme, though. I mean, most of the time, if the builder is reputable and you're buying a Danny, you can expect that that Danny is going to wobble and going to roll and stay on the surface, right? So then you don't have to usually mess with the lip so much. Instead, line tie. Line tie is where you can start to get into the nuance and definitely not risk any kind of, irreparable damage, right? So I know you're a line tie fiddler. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me about that a little bit?
I as much as I don't constantly adjust a metal lip on the fly, I adjust the line tie constantly. Because, as I've mentioned many times before, I purposely bring a limited number of plugs with me. Part of the selection choice in the first place is they're going to be able to cover the water I plan to fish the most effectively, most thoroughly. And then of those that I choose, versatility. A needlefish that sinks like a rock is going to be tough to get to run shallow, but a shallow to moderate needlefish can be fished deeper by slowing us, so there's ways you can do that. And the same thing you can do on the metal lip side, in that, let's take a troller. Just by tweaking that line tie, and it's the opposite. If you bend the line tie up, it dives down more. If you bend it down, it dives up more in its simplest form. I know I can essentially take a troller, make it dive a couple of feet more down, or not dive and almost wiggle right on the surface just by playing with that line tie. Like, I'm thinking as I'm describing this, I've got a spot where I'll throw that one troller, and based on what stage of the tide I'm at or what level the current has developed to, I'm tweaking it and getting it to go more towards the bottom or not quite to the bottom, depending which direction of the tide I'm working. So I'm constantly playing around with it so that I can, in essence, let's say I have 3 metal lips in my bag that I can tweak to go shallow, average, and deep. That's like having 9 plugs, in essence, in my mind, because each of the 3 can go 3 ways, 3 times 3 times 3, and it just becomes more efficient for my plug bag packing at the beginning of the night. Plus, I feel that it further puts me in tune with exactly what the lure is doing, where it is in the water in front of me, where I'm presenting it. So I'm paying that much more attention to exactly what that lure is doing, as opposed to just clip, cast, retrieve, cast, retrieve, cast, retrieve, switch out. I'm thinking it through perhaps too much at times, but it helps me to stay in the moment and not lose track of what's going on. And I mean, I've had enough times where that little tweak, I feel, got me into the fish when I wasn't getting into them before, because I was able to put it at the right depth where those fish were staging.
And I think you raised a really important point about metal lips in general, and that's that they take up a lot of room in your bag. They take up a ton of room in your bag. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to say never, because it seems like in the surf there is no never and there is no always. There's all kinds of exceptions, right? But I will say virtually never do I put a metal lip in a tube. Mine usually live in between the tubes, like in the front of the bag, because they just slide down nicer outside and they're big and bulky. So again, I'm not using rear hooks, so that makes a big difference. But if you can have a plug that now covers, 2 plugs, let's even just say 2 plugs, you're cutting it down by half. And of course, with you just said you could cut it down by a lot more. I have a scenario actually, hearing you say that, you're talking about trying to get that plug to get down more or not dragging the bottom. I actually have a spot in a scenario, though rare, where I'm trying to keep it on the surface. And at this particular spot, it starts off pretty weak current-wise, and then the current builds before the current shuts off. And as the current builds, I can have a hard time keeping my metal lip swinging with the current and also keeping it from digging too hard and then getting down, like going down too much. I'm not talking about at the bottom. I'm just saying it gets down through the surface film, through that disruption that the surface makes. And now your plug is, even if it's 8-10 inches down, it doesn't work anymore. Plus, also in these particular cases, whether it's a Danny or a Pikey or a Surfster or something like, or a Goo Eye, something like that, once it gets down, I just don't pick up fish with it anymore. It has to be on that surface, wagging, bulging water. And so for me, as the tide moves, now I'm not adjusting it constantly. I'm not really checking in constantly. But once at the beginning, I want it to be on the surface. So, the line tie is a certain way. I'm not going to mess with the lip. As the current builds, I have to then start messing with the line tie to keep that on the surface when I swing. Now, it ends up swinging out anyways. I mean, as soon as it gets past a certain, a clock, whatever it is, it's going to start digging too much anyways. And so it's going to sort of spin out. And then it starts to start to want to roll, which is the other problem. And, or swim so chaotically, it doesn't seem to pick up any fish. So I almost do the opposite, right? You're trying to sort of get yours down without bottoming out, and I'm sort of trying to keep mine on the top without even diving. And I think that's something that a lot of anglers are really afraid of, those two things. They're afraid of jamming those lips into the bottom, or they're afraid of fishing something right on the surface. So I think it's interesting that we each brought up one of those things right away, and how the line tie keeps us in both of those places, right? Yeah. It's weird. But I think that those are both zones, right?
And it's another thing, like with me tweaking the line tie that I've found. So like I said, up on the line tie makes it go down.
Yep.
We're going to say within reason. You almost can't bend it too far up.
That's right.
Making it go down and still have a good swim. But conversely, I find it very easy to bend the line tie down too far.
Oh.
Wanting it to come up, at least with the plugs I'm doing it to, where it hits a point that they don't swim right.
Interesting.
I mean, I've almost gotten them when I'm really trying to torque that thing down to get it up top, quickly gotten to the point where it almost rolls. Like I can totally blow out. And I think what that is because if, like, let's just take a troller, for instance. If you're looking at the plane of the head of the troller that cut continues essentially in line with the same angle as the metal lip digging in itself. Like I heard at one point in Thomas theory that you wanted those two to match the same angle.
Okay.
Not go into each other, but they run on the same, angle.
Right.
So if you have the line tie trying to get it down and it comes up, it's working kind of against that. They're like fighting each other to dig down. Whereas when the line tie is bending down the same angle, it's now all pulling the same direction, and it just like screwballs everything up.
Yeah. That makes sense, right? Because now they're fighting against each other. Interesting.
Yeah, it even if you look at it, like if you just bend a line tie down and put your snap on and pull it when it's down, for me too, it also tries to like the line tie tries to swing around more on itself, whereas if you bend it up, it almost still stays true to the center. I know there's some science behind that I can't comprehend in my plug concepts, but I've noticed that too. That adds into those different pulls, add into like throwing chaos into the swim, which I imagine there'd be a time where that could be beneficial, but it'd probably be like, 1 in 1,000. You want that wacky chaos swim to trigger the bite, but I haven't found that yet.
So that's really interesting. So as often happens on this podcast, even though we talk for hours and talk a lot and have known each other for a little while now, this is something I'm learning in the moment on the podcast, on our own podcast, because this is not something that I've ever really even considered or even experienced. But this is the thing. Your metal, I'm going to speak for you, and then you can tell me I'm wrong, because I probably am. Your metal lip usage is primarily subsurface and bottom of the column. Is that true?
Yeah.
And mine is generally near the surface and in the upper column for sure. I mean, that's the thing. So I bet that makes a little bit of a difference, but I have not paid very close attention to that, Toby. And I should see some of the smaller, they're not really that small, 2.5 to 3 ounce metal lips that I use that are subsurface, if I have been messing them up by trying to get them up or down. Normally, I'm with you. Normally, if I'm using a subsurface, though, I'm just going to switch a plug. I'm going to switch from, a Mike's Magnum Swimmer to a Maniac Junior or something like that, which is a totally different thing, right? Mm-hmm. But I haven't been paying enough attention to when I'm cranking on that lip to try to keep it up, so I'm bending it down. What am I doing to that? The other thing I was just thinking, which is outside of what we're talking about, but another aspect that I find really makes a difference in the action, where it swims, how it swims, is specifically the size of that front hook. And I think changing the size of that front hook, I don't think enough surf anglers pay attention to what hooks they're using, why they're using them, the size. I think generally a lot of anglers use too small hooks, etc. I think a lot of the plugs, even from builders, come with too small a hook, and I think you probably agree. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I have found that using a big front hook can really affect a metal lip, and sometimes in a really good way. It can slow it down, so it makes it a little more subtle. It can really drag it down, too, especially if you're not using something more in the back. Is that something you mess with at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, like you noted a minute ago, do more with my metal lips subsurface. In that case, I try to go on the larger end of the biggest front hook I can manage. And of course, as we've said, like I'm only using the one treble hook. So of the entire plug, I basically just got that front one. But if I'm trying to get it down, I mean, absolutely a 5.0 Mustad 5X on a maple swimmer, maple torpedo swimmer is going to dive deeper than a 4.0 of the same size. I mean, it's a massive hook. So if you look through my plug bag, you can tell which ones are set up for the really deep conditions, for the moderately deep, based right off the bat, just on that hook. And it was funny, as much as I immediately know that subject, when I fish when I got back into fishing surface metal lips, because I didn't fish surface metal lips for a long time, it took me a little while to remember that. And I'm throwing a big 5-0, treble on the front of a surface metal lip. I'm like, why the heck isn't this thing working? Why is, I'm standing next to Jay, we're throwing the same damn plug. Why is he hammering them on top and I can't get a bite? I'm like, oh yeah, dummy, switched it to the 4-0 drop down, or a couple I've even got on those surface where I did rig them with a 3-0.
Yep.
Because they're unique cases of the same plug, essentially, where I really want that thing to glue to the surface, stay right up on top, just to wiggle, where the hook is almost not even involved in the equation of pulling it anymore. It's just sort of along for the ride, whereas once you get up in those upper sizes, they start affecting the drive of the plug versus, it's not quite a passenger anymore. It's might not be the full driver, but it's definitely sitting in the front seat.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I think, so some of the plugs, and I'm not going to mention any by name, but some of the plugs that I have, metal lips, they come with a 3.0 VMC, and if you take a 5.0 BKK, I don't know, what are they, the Vipers or whatever, or like a Saltex, or like an Owner ST66, and you put a 5.0, so you're going 2 sizes up, but you're also going to a much heavier, like tuna grade hook. Mm-hmm. What a difference that makes. I mean, it really, really can make a huge difference. And so if you're afraid of the lip and you don't want to mess it up, this is another way to tune, what you're doing that goes beyond just hanging on to a fish, which, I mean, and maybe this is a perfect way to end it too. One of the modifications I like to make to a metal lip is ways to try and hang on to the fish, because they are fish losers. There's a lot of mass that fish can swing around. And if you can put on a bigger hook and keep your swim, that is another huge modification, because it really does make a huge difference in hanging on to those fish when you finally do hook a really nice one. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.